The deranged, hyper-partisan impeachment witch hunt. Impeachment.
For just the fourth time in history, a US president faces the prospect of impeachment and removal from office. At stake, did Donald Trump deliberately withhold aid to pressure a foreign government to investigate his political rival, the quid pro quo? For some, it's a clear-cut case.
If Trump is allowed to use the powers of his office for personal, narrow, political, electoral gain, then I worry about our democracy.
Yet for others, in an America more polarized than ever before, the president can do no wrong.
It's a very weak case, if any, that's there presently. And you're going to have a lot of other shoes that have to fall before you see me convinced that something impeachable happened.
To better understand the present, we have to go back to the past. President Richard Nixon, just like Donald Trump, was hugely popular among Republicans until his efforts to influence his re-election brought him down. This is the Watergate building that's come to epitomise the downfall of President Richard Nixon. In the summer of 1972, it was the Democrat campaign headquarters in the run-up to the election. And on the night of June the 17th, burglars tried to break into the building and steal sensitive documents and bug telephone lines. It later emerged that President Nixon not only knew about the break-in, but tried to cover it up. An impeachment inquiry began a year later but was never concluded. The evidence would prove so damning that the president was forced to resign from office before he could be removed.
The committee has just approved its first article of impeachment against President Nixon.
To some, the charges brought against Richard Nixon, the abuse of office for personal political gain, are eerily similar to those now facing President Trump.
Ms. Holtzman.
Aye. Elizabeth Holtzman was a young congresswoman who sat on the committee that recommended articles of impeachment against Nixon.
The cover-up, the Watergate cover-up, when President of the United States used the power of his office to keep the fact of the burglary and its connection to his campaign out of the public eye. This was solely to help his re-election effort. That's what we have here. The President of the United States using the vast power of his office to help himself get reelected and not to help the country in any way.
After Watergate, they hoped it would never happen again.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
On the face of it, President Bill Clinton's case far more simple. It played out here at the White House, where he began an affair with the young intern Monica Lewinsky. In January 1998, though, he denied the relationship, both on camera to the nation and in front of a grand jury, though DNA testing would later expose his lies, and he was eventually impeached by the House later that year. But the Senate did not convict him. He was never removed from office and continued to serve out his term as president.
Aye, Mr. McCollum.
Aye. Back then, Congressman Bill McCollum served on the committee that brought impeachment charges against Bill Clinton. During the impeachment of President Clinton, you said, "I bear no personal animosity toward our president, but I happen to believe
that if any president commits the crimes of perjury and obstruction of justice and witness tampering, he should not be allowed to remain in office."
But people say, oh, it's all about sex. But it was not all about sex. It was lying. It was about the fact he lied under oath. It's a very different feeling. In this case, you have, very little that there's a consensus on in American public opinion. I think it's all politics, and I think it's fair up to a point. I don't know if it's illegal, technically. If he'd been doing a quid pro quo.
Does that not make you feel a bit squeamish that he...
It makes me say I wouldn't do that. I don't like the fact he did it. But is it illegal? Does it rise to such a merit that you would say, hey, you're going to take this guy out of office right now when he's doing a lot of other good things for that? For that?
Precisely for that, polls now show nearly 50% of Americans do believe President Trump should be impeached. Like Nixon and Clinton before him, he's accused of abusing his power, pressuring Ukraine to open political investigations, trying to cover up the evidence, and then preventing witnesses from coming forward. Yet despite the mounting evidence, Republicans say it's a sham.
Donald Trump is innocent and the deep state is guilty.
Donald Trump is not well.
And that's the biggest difference between now and then. Cable channels that constantly spew pro- and anti-Trump rhetoric.
The psychotic anti-Trump hysteria, it is now completely overtaken the entire Democratic Party.
Network news has become a toxic political battleground, and the president has weaponized Twitter to present his version of the facts. The truth is, though, even if Donald Trump is impeached, it's very unlikely he will be removed from office by the Republican-controlled Senate. Or is it?
Remember, Richard Nixon had been elected in one of the biggest landslide victories in the history of the United States. For people to accept his impeachment and removal from office, they had to change their minds about him. That's a huge thing that happened. And it did happen. Why? Because they saw the evidence, they saw a fair process, and they wanted to retain a democracy.
As the public hearings open in President Trump's impeachment inquiry this week, the question, will the evidence persuade his supporters to change their minds about him?